For all of the topics covered in the Congress revision video, this video will focus on congressional caucuses and analysing whether Congress can be considered as a broken branch. Congressional caucuses are the collection of members of either major party elected to the House or Senate. More widely, an association of members of Congress to advance a certain interest. Strictly speaking, there are only 4, but others have developed. There is the House Republican Caucus, the House Democrats Caucus, and 2 parallel caucuses in the Senate. These 4-party caucuses are not monolithic. Over time, and especially in the House with its larger membership, other groups or caucuses, officially called congressional member organizations, have grown up to represent smaller but cohesive groups within each chamber, often based on ideological, regional, ethnic, or economic interests. For example, there is the Blue Dog Coalition, which is mainly Southern House Democrats who are fiscally conservative, or the Congressional Black Caucus, which was formed exclusively for African American members of both houses. Caucuses can have members from both Democrats and Republican, however they tend to lean towards one party. In 2006, Norman Ornstein and Thomas Mann published a book referring to Congress as the broken branch. Let's look at the main criticisms of Congress. There is the partisanship votes, filibuster, log rolling, pork barreling, gridlock, appointments made on personality and not for fitness of office, fragmented by committees, not representative of the people, and ineffective oversight. To assess Congress's effectiveness, we need to consider how well it performs on each of its main functions. The 3 main functions are legislative, oversight, and representation. First, let's look at Congress's legislative role and whether or not this is dysfunctional. It can be considered dysfunctional because it doesn't pass many laws. The 93rd Congress passed 949 laws, whereas the 112th Congress passed 283 laws. Partisanship is a long, complicated system, and the abuse of the filibuster has contributed to this. Conference committee agreements used to be about 100 per 2 years in Congress. However, this has now increased. Between 2013 and 2014, there was just 3. Lots of these laws are not of any significance. Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, Congress was the most productive it had ever been, passing things such as landmark healthcare, environment, civil rights, transportation laws were also made. Nowadays, there are major issues that often remain unaddressed, such as immigration reform, gun control, environmental protection, healthcare. One of the problems Congress's legislative role has is how often it causes government shutdowns. Congress has shut down 12 times since 1981. The last was in January 2018 when Congress could not agree on a budget. There was a second shutdown in February, but this only lasted 9 hours and did not interrupt government services. Shutdowns happen when Congress and the President fail to pass legislation funding of government operations and agencies. Without agreement on appropriation bills that guide annual spending, Congress cannot function. In a shutdown, federal government functions are frozen. This includes national parks and monuments. It also includes the processing of applications and visas. On the other hand, Congress's legislative role isn't dysfunctional because conflict is necessary to avoid the concentration of power. It's also necessary as it is an unavoidable component of a democratic government. It avoids the tyranny of the majority, and is it really Congress's fault if there is partisanship? Now let's compare whether Congress is dysfunctional in its oversight role. It can be considered dysfunctional because oversight is ineffective when the same party controls the legislative and the executive branches. Only when the executive and the legislature are controlled by different parties does oversight work. During Bush's first 6 years, Congress was considered a lapdog, as only 37 hearings were held between 2003 and 2004. The lack of hearings on Iraq or Afghanistan meant that this led to no oversight at all. This all changed when the Democrats controlled both houses post-2006, and they started to conduct investigations on Iraq, and 4 high-profile executive branch officials lost their jobs. Congress does not always have access to all the information, and this can be a weakness. Driven by partisanship, point scoring, not genuine commitment to checks and balances, is often seen as a weakness. Clinton's impeachment is often considered to have been party motivated. Appointments made on personality and party favour, not on suitability of the job, fail at the oversight function. A more fragmented and partisan Congress has led to a decline in institutional identity. Members have little incentive to act collectively. They don't want to engage in cross-party cooperation against the executive when it can damage their party interests. On the other hand, it can be considered functional because it keeps the administration on their toes, prevents arrogance and misconduct. It's what the Founding Fathers wanted, and since 2007 there has been an increase in oversight hearings. Finally, let's look at whether Congress is dysfunctional in its representational role. It can be considered as dysfunctional because Congress does not look like America, and wanting to effectively represent your constituents can lead to pork barreling. Compromise is now seen as a betrayal to your constituents. By representing your constituents, you could be susceptible to iron triangles. Gerrymandering can lead to polarisation and a desire to represent the fringe element of the party. However, the representative role of Congress can be considered as functional because there are high levels of incumbency. Senators and congressmen are often re-elected, so this shows that the voters are concerned at how their own representatives are doing. Members are encouraged not to live in Washington and live in their own state in order to stay in line with their constituents. A conclusion that can be drawn from this is that Congress has passed few significant laws in recent times. Oversight is weak, particularly during a united government. There is little public esteem for the legislative branch, and much of this can be attributed to increased partisanship. However, this could be to do with gridlocking and long debates.